Good morning and welcome everybody to the Ethics and Workplace Inclusion webinar we have this morning. Our guest speaker back with us is Judith Getso. So Judith, are you there today? And say hello to everybody.
Yes, okay. I am. Good morning.
Awesome. So yeah, we've got everybody signing in. A few more people still lingering, but we have a good crowd this morning. If y'all could go ahead and get to your question box that's in your control panel and let us know if you are hearing me okay and if you are able to hear Judith. That way we make sure that we have a good sound check and everything's plugged in okay. So if you could send me a note in the question box, loud and clear, super, thank you Chloe, good, Courtney, Jose says yes. Awesome. So people signing in saying they can hear us. So that's good. I think we're off to a good start then. Again, my name is Noreen Jalloway-Gill. I'm with the UNT-WISE, and I'll be your host today. If you are having any difficulty accessing the webinar, the email address you need to contact is untwise@unt.edu, and that way you'll be able to get the information. At the last webinar, the first webinar of this two-part series on ethics and workplace inclusion, we had asked for people to submit some stories, and we got some very wonderful stories submitted, and Judith will be using those today. An additional copy or a copy of the stories can be found on the UNT-WISE website. So it's a PDF document, and again, both that document as well as the PowerPoint presentation that you'll be seeing today is on the website, but you'll need the most current version of Adobe Reader in order to see that. So if you want to access the materials, it's there and it's available. If during this session, if you have any questions or if you have some ideas, comments, you know that Judith loves participation. And the first class was very, very good at participating, and it sounded and really wonderful information. So please send me your comments through that question box, and I'll be sure and share them with Judith. If we don't get to everything today, then we'll try to be responsive. But yeah, we do like those comments, and you guys did a wonderful, wonderful job. So as you know, this is we'll be getting CEU credits for today's session, and it is a total of 3. If you know of people who had signed up but they weren't able to make it because we had a change of time for this second session, this session will be recorded, and it will be on the on-demand series at the UNT-WISE website, so they will be able to access it and get the second part of the two-part session. So just letting people know about that. So just as a reminder, Judith Getso is an instructor at the University of Texas Pan Am and with a Master's in Rehabilitation Counseling. And she is really focusing on the leadership issues and as well in rehabilitation. She also has a background in addictions, medical aspects of rehabilitation, and violence against women. So I know you have a lot of information to share, Judith, so I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Noreen, and good morning, everyone. For those of you that are joining us for part 2, welcome back, and thank you for submitting the stories, the case studies, and if you're joining us for the first time, well, welcome. And the information that I covered, as Noreen was mentioning, I got through the first part, and that the PowerPoint is available to you, so you can follow along on that even if you're joining us for the second part, as I will be using those PowerPoint slides and touching base on what I didn't get to cover last week, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago. So with that, let's get started. Let me just very quickly go back over the objectives. So in part 1, the objectives that we covered were recognizing the guiding principles to support people with disabilities in the typical workplace, and aligning the leadership roles of the employment specialist, job seeker, and the employer as they relate to each other for a successful employment outcome. So we started on that. I basically covered the information on personalities, because personalities and the traits play a big, big role in leadership, of course. They're the foundation. And so today I really want to cover the last two objectives, which are identifying ethical dilemmas that challenge employment staff when seeking and supporting individuals to find, get, and keep a job, and identify strategies that would result in positive acceptance in the workplace. So last time I reviewed the Code of Ethics, part of the Code of Ethics for CRCC, and we're focusing on Section A1, the welfare of those served by rehab counselors, and the subsections, which are primary responsibility, rehabilitation and counseling plans, employment needs, and autonomy. So let's keep those in mind, of course, today as we go through the material. And then the second section is respecting diversity, respecting culture, and of course advocating against non-discrimination. And as we always say, disability is diversity, and it is a culture, our culture of people with disabilities. I also touched base on the principles of ethical behavior of our CRCC Code of Ethics, the autonomy, fidelity, beneficence, and so forth. So I'll refer to those as well throughout today's discussion, and ask that, when we have a little bit of discussion, feedback during this webinar, let's relate to this. Let's relate to the Code of Ethics and, of course, the principles of ethical behavior. I also touched base on ethical leadership, very much like the principles of ethical behavior. Principles here: respecting others, serving others, showing justice, manifesting honesty, and building community. And I was discussing one of the ethical issues that was brought up last time about working with young consumers, specifically those right out of high school. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but I think that when we discuss that ethical issue, you'll see how it's so important, I think, to build community to help solve that ethical issue, that ethical dilemma. And I touched on the big 5 personality traits of leadership. As I mentioned, personality traits are the foundation of leadership. When researchers, centuries back, started looking at what makes a good leader, they based it on the person's personality traits. So that really didn't leave room for people with disabilities to be considered a leader. And because they thought, well, a good leader has these personality traits, these innate traits. They were born with these traits that make them good leaders. They were strong, they were extroverted, and stable, and so forth. We mentioned the acronym CANOE, or OCEAN, when we refer to these big 5 personality traits, one of which is neuroticism. Well, when we speak of neuroticism and relate that to people with disabilities, a lot of times there's a bad connotation that goes along with that. And that's not necessarily, neuroticism is not necessarily a bad thing. But think about this in terms of centuries ago, when if we were to discuss the leadership capabilities and personality traits of a person with a disability and then speak of neuroticism, right there you're looking at very negative aspects, or that could be interpreted as negative aspects. Not so today. With your work with rehab services, that has changed, and it is still continuing to change. But again, I want for us to keep this in mind. So today, oh my goodness gracious, in the time that we have, I'm going to try to go through this as best as I can and not confuse you, but there's quite a bit of information that I did want to discuss with you. I'd like to talk about some leadership theories that are really the basic theories, the basic models that I think really relate to working with people with disabilities. One in particular is what we call the leader-member exchange model, or LMX theory. Now, if you'll notice here, this discusses in-group and out-group. And as we talk about ethical dilemmas, or we refer to the case studies that were submitted, I think you'll begin to notice, it's my hope that you'll begin to notice that a lot of times when we discuss workplace inclusion, or we assess for workplace inclusion, we see that our consumers with disabilities very much can be in the out group. Our job is to get them to become part of that in group. Now also, the full range model of leadership. I know this looks like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of information there, but I want to focus on the transformational aspect, the transformational factors of the full range model of leadership, because whether we realize it or not, you are already a transformational leader. You're practicing a lot of what the model discusses. And of course, servant leadership. We touched base on this. I introduced it in the last webinar, and I had a couple of participants that said, you know, this reminds me, one said, this reminds me of my pastor, what my pastor does. I said, yes, exactly, that's what it is. And then another person said, it's stewardship. Absolutely. So again, let's keep that in mind as well. And along the way, as I mentioned, we'll refer to the ethical issues in the case studies and talk about strategies that help us with to deal with these ethical issues or potential ethical issues. Questions so far?
No
okay?
questions yet. I think that I think it's a lot of information, as you said. So so we're ready to move on.
Okay, so let's begin with the leader-member exchange theory. Again, this is one of the first models, and I really think that you'll be able to recognize, if you don't already, which I'm sure you do, but recognize even more the interactions, the in-groups, the out-groups of the LMX theory as they relate to our consumers with disability. So with the leader-member exchange theory, it focuses on the dyadic relationship of the leadership process. So it's that linkage that the leader and the followers have or form or try to form. So again, it's not, it's still a vertical dyad. So we see communication come from top down. That's why we see the leader as a leader, the supervisor, the employer as the leader. However, it does encourage communication from bottom up. The leader needs to be, the employer in this case, needs to be open to that communication. So where do rehab professionals, we need to recognize that in the employer, in the organizational culture, and in the consumer with the disability, and encourage that. I know easier said than done, as they say, but this is part of the LMX theory. So again, we have the development of in-group and out-groups. And in-groups receive more information, influence, confidence, and concern from their leaders than do out-groups, or the subordinates as we call them in leadership. I particularly when I'm discussing people with disabilities, don't really like to use the word subordinates because I feel that it doesn't empower the consumer with a disability, but in leadership, that's what we refer to. So again, the consumer with a disability would look for more responsibilities, opportunities for advancement, which lead to more communication with the leader. The out-group, being part of the out-group, basically the employees, the followers, have the attitude, unfortunately, of, you know, it's just a job. It's just a job. I'm just getting a paycheck. I just want to work and go home. So that's why it's important to move anyone from the out-group into the in-group. So with a high-quality leader-member exchange, it produces positive organizational outcomes. There's less employee turnover. You know, think about your work setting. Think about what you would like. If you are part of the in-group, there's less chance you're going to want to quit that job. There's more chance to receive better evaluations because you're taking on more responsibilities. You're more extroverted. There's more chance for promotions, better job assignments, better attitudes by the employees, the followers, and of course the leaders. And therefore, there's usually more support from the leader, more participation. Again, it's important that the leader be open to this type of leadership. So leadership making develops progressively over time and in 3 phases. There's a stranger phase, the acquaintance phase, and the mature partnership phase, or what we refer to as SAP. You'll note that this influenced our next model, which I'll discuss, which is the full range model of leadership. So how does the LMX leadership style, communication, planning, and support strategies impact how a person is perceived and accepted in their workplace, resulting in long-term sustainable employment? Well, we covered that a little bit, but for those of you that are visual learners, basically this is what we're discussing. You'll see how there's more organizational citizenship being part of the in-group. There's more social capital and transformative behaviors. Now, social capital being key for our consumers with disabilities, and actually for any employer, because when we have those social relationships in and out of work, we become part of that in-group. We feel more included. There's more workplace inclusion. Now, with the phases that are involved here, the stranger, acquaintance, and partner, in the stranger phase, the roles are very scripted. They're one way. There's low-quality exchanges between the leader and the follower, and the interests are pretty much of self-interest. What's in it for me on behalf of the consumer with a disability, the employer, and what's in it for me on behalf of the leader, the employer, right? And when the exchanges become a little better, when we see the consumer with the disability wanting to take on more of those responsibilities, they then build the next phase. Okay, where there's the acquaintance phase, the roles are tested, the influences are mixed, and so forth. And then that leads to the partnership phase. Questions so far? At all?
We don't have any questions yet.
Okay. So very much like these little fish in the fishbowl, where you have the stranger, they're all alone, and then they become, okay, the communication becomes a little bit more mixed influences, and then we want to get them to become partners, part of that in-group. Okay, so what we need to do is recognize the dyadic relationship. It's important to recognize the existence of in-groups and out-groups as you go and assess the workplace. What is the culture? Can you recognize the in-groups and out-groups? How open is the employer to perhaps practicing LMX, or does that employer already do that? Do they promote this in the organization? If they do, how do they do that? So recognize the nature of differences between the in-group and out-group. How does each accomplish their goals? if you see the in-groups and out-groups, how are they accomplishing their goals? How well does the leader work with followers, and how well do the followers work with the leader? So for successful inclusion, we want to stress the importance of inclusion, encouraging the leader to make this a part of the organizational culture, to promote autonomy and non-discrimination, promote those dyadic relationships with both groups, and essentially work to bringing the whole organization into the in-group if they're not already there. So we need to build trust and respect with all to create an in-group and give all a chance for responsibility and autonomy. So when we're looking at this model, we can see, thinking back about the code of ethics, our code of ethics and our principles and those of leadership all apply here. So I'll give you just a second to look over the, or to get to the first case study, which is representing the consumer. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any right now.
No, there are no questions.
Okay, well, hopefully read this, but basically representing the consumer, I really like this case study. This is not so much an ethical dilemma, but a very positive outcome. Dealing with Bob, who's 34 years of age and was diagnosed with a brain injury due to a car accident that occurred a year ago, that he was involved in a year ago. So Bob had worked as a paralegal, and while he was recuperating, the employer decided to basically move in another direction without Bob. So not to be judgmental, but here I thought, that might have been a very transactional office, and that's not a bad thing. Let's look at being involved in court cases and so forth in a law firm. You know, transactional leadership is not a bad thing. We really would like for all to be transformational, but transactional is not bad. Think of the military. Military tends to be very transactional, and that's not a bad thing. That keeps us safe. So I try not to be judgmental there, but I try to look at this and focus, okay, let's see what leadership styles, models worked best for this consumer. And I think LMX applies here very much because we see that Bob did not let that, the fact that he was not able to continue in his job, at that particular job, he didn't let that stop him. He went on and he was motivated and he wanted to work and was motivated to learn a new job rather quickly, all with the help of his rehab professional, of course. So here we see that Bob attempted to quickly become part of the in-group. He assumed more role responsibilities. He worked well with the leader. The leader in turn worked well with Bob. And maybe their personalities matched, which helped. So when we look at this case study, we recognize that at first, in the stranger phase, they were like, okay, what's in it for me? You know, on both sides. Basically, Bob committed to a three-week period of working just to show how motivated he was to learn the job. And of course the employer said, wow, you know, that's to my benefit. But look how it worked out. Okay, so it was a give and take, very much so, progressing through all three phases. Questions on this at all? No question?
I'm not sure if people are still reading the end of the story. And
okay.
How things worked out for Bob.
Okay. Well, basically, Bob was hired. He was kept on at this job, and was said here, he was pleased and never did ask any more questions of that sort. Rather, the employer never asked any more questions as far as, well, what's the disability? And, you know, where they're a little hesitant. Bob was interviewed that day and was hired 2 days later. I provided 2 weeks of job coaching, and Bob had been on the job for over 10 years with no calls from the job site for follow-up training. So, again, very much showing the great dyadic relationship here. There was very much a high-quality leader-member exchange. There was trust, respect, and obligation towards each other, which worked out well. Comments, concerns?
The question that I do have is, someone sent in, was he offered a job at the local hotel after the 3 weeks of work?
Yes. Yes.
And then I don't have any other questions that have come in.
Okay. Okay, so let me touch base on the full range model of leadership. Again, this applies to us as rehab professionals. Part of this is transactional leadership and passive avoidant leadership. Basically, transactional leadership, as I mentioned, think of the military. It's not always a bad thing to be transactional, but it applies in certain situations. A lot of times, I think when we're looking at consumers with disability and wanting to include them, we need more of a transformational leadership. So transactional basically is based on contingent reward. I know we see this a lot in different work settings. We can think of transactional leadership or contingent reward based on something like, for example, let's look at school. You turn in an assignment, I give you a grade. If somebody's selling cars, for example, the more cars they sell, the more commission they get, or they may earn a bonus. So it's very managerial. The passive avoidant leadership style, basically, there's management by exception, passive, when the leader does not get involved in any ethical issues, ethical dilemmas. There's no conflict management or conflict resolution until there's already a problem. Okay, so which is not good. And then, of course, laissez-faire, which is no leadership at all. So this full range leadership model led to, again, transformational leadership and servant leadership. So transactional leadership, as I mentioned, there's no individualization of followers' needs. There's no focus on followers' personal development. So how do then we include consumers with disabilities? How would that help workplace inclusion? If the organization looks like, you know, these two dogs here, where you have this huge dog saying, go and do what I tell you, and the little chihuahua saying, you don't own me, and what about your ethical behavior here? Well, you know, this may not be very conducive to workplace inclusion of people with disabilities, of consumers with disabilities. Transactional leadership relies on the reciprocity between the leader and the follower based on the good or the advancement of both. For example, if your job involves needing to meet quotas, well, there's that good leader-member exchange, of course, if the quotas are met. Okay, if not, there's really not positive reciprocity between the leader and the follower. So the leader is influential because the follower has to do as is expected. So in a sense, the leader earns that so-called respect only because they're the boss and you don't want to get on their bad side. So again, not very conducive to workplace inclusion. But transformational leadership is quite the opposite. It's where the leader has the key to unlock what is in order to discover what can be. That's what you do on a daily basis with your consumers. You are that transformational leader. You have the keys to unlock what is in order to discover and help them discover what can be. You have that strong emphasis on your consumers. You understand their needs, their values, their morals. You understand your own needs, values, and morals as a rehab professional, as they pertain to the code of ethics, to the ethical principles. You help your consumers in their personal struggles concerning conflicting values that can lead to ethical dilemmas. Perhaps, I want to keep my job, but I'm still very much an outcast, and in that out group, I don't feel like I belong, or I want to earn a good paycheck. I have the potential to work, but as one case study mentions, family is relying on me receiving SSI, SSDI. Okay, so we look at our consumers in this situation and we stress our values as liberty, justice, and equality, which pertain to our code of ethics. We build that connection between the leader and the follower, which raises the level of morality of both. And as a leader, we assist our consumers in assessing their values and their needs, and you help them to rise to a higher level of functioning. You do this every day. And as a person with a disability that's made use of services at DARS, I really appreciate that, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today had I not had someone that was very transformational, or mentors that were very transformational. So how does this come into play? Well, inspirational motivation. We look at the 4 transformational leadership factors. The leader communicates high expectations to followers, motivate commitment to vision and organization. They build team spirit. There's a culture of inclusion. They try to build the in-group, the organization as an in-group. They have that culture. They use symbols, logos, and so forth. There's idealized influence. The leader acts as a strong role model for followers, and the followers identify with these leaders and want to emulate them. So they set those high ethical standards, and they do the right thing, which helps with workplace inclusion. If this is the standard that they set, if this is what they expect, this helps our consumer with a disability. They promote intellectual stimulation. They encourage creativity and innovation. It does not matter the disability. It does not matter who the employee is or their disability. They look at them and say, everyone's equal. Everybody has a creative side, has great ideas. I'm willing to listen to this. I'm willing to promote this within my organization, within my employees. They welcome and encourage challenges to values, beliefs, etc. So that opens the door to communication. And they promote individualized consideration. They provide a supportive climate, listen, coach, advice, and assist in autonomy and becoming actualized. So how does this pertain to workplace inclusion? What do we need to do? We need to recognize that it's a process between the leader and the follower. The transformational leadership, the leader may be a visionary, but the follower's participation is required. So we need to encourage this within our consumers with disabilities. Transactional outcomes are what is expected in most organizations. You can see where a lot of times the communication is top-down and doesn't allow for bottom-up communication. Transformational outcomes go beyond the expected. They see potential in their consumers, in their employees, and they encourage that, they nurture that. Okay, so the leader role model, ethical behavior, and act as social architects. extremely important for workplace inclusion. So they empower the consumer, they nurture change, they build confidence, they express viewpoints and ideas. The follower wants to emulate the leader's ethical behavior, and they learn about and identify with the leader and the organization's vision and understand the roles and organizational culture and importance of each. So, questions so far?
Well, we do have a couple of comments, or one comment and a question. One is from Chloe, who says that this is a great and affirming way of stating our mission and support employment. So we appreciate that, Chloe. And then we had a question about what if leadership styles conflict? For instance, working with a person who is passive-aggressive, the only thing that seems to work is creating a clear expectation and providing straightforward / stern feedback. That is an uncomfortable position for me.
That is not always a bad thing. That would be looking at transactional leadership that you need to apply. And again, that's not always a bad thing, but what you would want to do then, again, is really look at the personality traits, specifically what I had mentioned earlier, the canoe or ocean, and recognize that in the consumer with the disability, and then what we see as what could be a potentially negative situation or negative trait, look at the positive. Try to see, okay, what is a positive in this? Although we may, it's easy to maybe focus on the negative a lot of times, look at what the positive is. How can I go from having to be so transactional to help my consumer with the disability, or help the leader that needs that transactional leadership? How can I change that to be more transformational, where we can make this a more transformational relationship? Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
I think that probably gave some good suggestions. And then there was one other comment about the in-group, out-group. It says, it seems that many consumers expect to be in the out group automatically.
Yes, exactly. That's why we have so many different theories and models of leadership, and so when I look at the LMX, that immediately that is, I should think about this in class all the time. It's like that so much describes consumers with people with disabilities just in general. Let's look at their home life. For example, even here, okay, with this next case study, it makes reference to when the consumer wanted to work. His name was Tommy. He says Tommy has 4 siblings who are all receiving SSI for LD disabilities, and none of whom can read or write. None of his other immediate family members can read or write, including mother, father, and grandmother. During our initial contact with Tommy at his residence, the grandmother asked, "Can you check to see why he doesn't get a check when all of his brothers and sisters get a check?" She was speaking as if Tommy receiving SSI status was the only way he could make it. So that right away puts Tommy in an out-group in his own family. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Can we recognize that? That's almost saying, he doesn't have the potential to earn, and therefore Tommy could very easily have said, "Oh, I just need, my monthly allowance," as I used to call it. And instead of working on that potential that he has to be very independent.
The comment that came in is that the disability is valued more than his ability to work.
Absolutely, which again goes back to, yes, that puts us in the out group, and we almost expect to be in that out group. Mm. Now, thankfully, with the rehab professional and their transformational leadership, we see here that within a week, Tommy received a call to come in for an interview as a retail clerk. He was so excited that he wanted to arrive 2 hours early. The trainer transported the consumer to his interview, rehearsing questions and answers all the way. The trainer had made management aware that Tommy would require some job coaching for orientation paperwork if he gets hired, and establish natural supports within the company to support Tommy over a long-term basis. So Tommy remembered many parts of our training and went to his interview with confidence. He accepted the position with much joy, and we assisted Tommy during his initial company training, and he quickly began to show good work ethic. So again, very successful case, very much transformational leadership exhibited by all, and I think a great job of finding perhaps a very transformational workplace that promotes the inclusion and autonomy and so forth. Questions so far?
Just a few comments from several people that the money is what really counts to the family and not so much the job. So
yes, absolutely. That is just such a sad sad reality that no matter how much we all do to educate people with disabilities, to educate their families, society in general, that's just still such a sad reality. But so we have our work cut out for us.
Well, and one of the other comments that came in was maybe there should be leadership styles in families.
Yes, okay, let's put it this way. I think that's a great idea for a research topic where we look at more at researching the leadership styles within families. How about leadership styles within families that have members with disabilities? I think that is another great research topic. So any of you that are attending classes right now, again, I encourage you, keep this in mind. Because let me tell you, we really, you hear me say this, I'll keep saying it probably forever and ever. We do not have enough information as it pertains to leadership styles and people with disabilities, or family of those with people that have members with disabilities. So this is a great area for research, great area. Okay, moving on to servant leadership. This was a philosophy developed by Robert Greenleaf, and he always said, good leaders must first become good servants. It's built on character and values, values which include involvement, which we look at as respect, trust, and individual strength. The follower needs become more knowledgeable, more autonomous, and again, the follower and leader become more like servants. So very much stewardship, as we mentioned last time. So the servant leadership perspective is it has a strong altruistic ethical overtone, and the leaders focus on and are attentive to the needs of the followers. They empathize with them. They take care of and nurture followers. So in helping others first, the leader helps himself, herself. I want to focus on empathizing with the follower. When I used to go to support groups for people with addictions, when I was completing my internship hours at one of the facilities here, this question I was always asked by new clients would be, were you ever a user? And of course, you have to refocus, get them to refocus, and basically kind of get them to understand the spotlight is not on me, the spotlight's on you, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying, no, we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you and the issues. But they felt that you could not empathize unless you used their drug and went through what they went through. And to some respects, that's true, but not necessarily. So again, we may not have a disability, but we can still empathize. As a servant leader, we can empathize with our consumers that do have disabilities. And it's important to get our leaders, the employers that are willing to work and hire with our consumers, to look at it in that respect. And for it not to be just, well, this looks good for my company, but to actually empathize with our consumers. So the servant leadership model is based on valuing people, developing people, sharing leadership, providing leadership, displaying authenticity, which relates to our code of ethics and our principles, and building community. Keep that in mind, building community. The leader has a social responsibility to be concerned with have-nots in the organization and remove inequalities and social injustices. They use less institutional power, so they get away from that transactional leadership. They use less control, and they shift authority to the followers, which encourages, again, workplace inclusion, encourages our consumers to see, to recognize their potential and not to be afraid to exhibit that and to talk about that to their employer. Okay, so basically servant leadership was based on a story dealing with Leo and how Leo was leading a group of men on a journey. Okay, and it's basically the story written by Hermann Hesse, Journey to the East. So in the story we see a band of men on a mythical journey. The central figure, of course, is Leo, and he accompanies the party. And, again, he tries to be a servant leader, and he does their menial chores. He sings songs, keeps them entertained, and so forth. So he sustains them with his spirit and his song, and he's a person of extraordinary presence. So all goes well on this journey until one day Leo disappears, and the group falls into disarray, and the journey is abandoned. So these men cannot make it without their servant, Leo. They look at him as a servant. So one day, one of the men bumps into Leo, and he says, everything, the group disbanded, we didn't accomplish what we needed to, and Leo takes him under his wing and takes him into the order that has sponsored that journey. So the man discovers that Leo, whom he had known first as his so-called servant, was in fact the head of the order. He was the guiding spirit of that order, that organization, and he was known as a great and noble leader. And I think we need to really emphasize this, keep this in mind, share this idea, this perspective with our employers, with the employees, to help with workplace inclusion, because again, a lot of times consumers with disabilities are looked at as somebody that just gets a paycheck, or rather a check for their family. That type of servanthood, being that type of a servant. Maybe they may look at our consumer as, oh, well, we can give them the menial chores, without recognizing that they're key to that organization just like anybody else. Because, again, the organization can learn from our consumers with disabilities. It makes the organization look good. Okay? And it also taps on a market, the market of people with disabilities. Does that make sense? Questions, comments?
You did get a couple of comments about how good the training is, and people are appreciating the time you're taking. So that's always good to share. And I did get one question, though, and I'm not sure where it came in at what part of the conversation, but how does this fit with employers being able to get their job done? I don't want to sound too social worky.
Well, and that's a good question. And you know, my study buddy is very much a social worker, has been for many, many years. So she always gives me that perspective as well. Well, we look at that as building a better organization, helping the productivity, because if you are willing to help others learn, you know, help others before you help yourself, what happens? They learn more skills. They're able to help in that productivity. There's better relationships within the organization. It's more positive. You have better socialization. You have better, the outlook is more positive. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I was writing down some of the phraseology that you're using, and those are things that we probably could pick up on when we are talking with employers, and those are things like building productivity, positive relationships, you know, things that are workplace language that we can use with our employers as we're speaking with them.
And again, let's look at it from this perspective, okay? And I think this would be more with social work, human capital, that loyalty by all, not just the leader, but the followers as well. Tapping into a broad talent pool. Our consumers have talents that perhaps they're not allowed to tap into, okay? We talked about the company's reputation. Let me see. The integration of our consumers with disability into that organization can lead to potential higher wages, more responsibilities, more advancement within that organization. Psychological capital is a big one. Again, if, you know, it's almost like saying if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Again, if, you know, everyone's happy, we have a positive psychological state in the organization. And that social capital, it's not just building those friendships, those relationships, but again, think about the friends at your job. Okay, if you are ill or need some assistance, who's apt to say, I'll cover your back? A friend or somebody you haven't built that social capital with? Does that make sense?
So thank you. This is great. Okay.
You're welcome. Okay, so very quickly, because I know we just have a few minutes left, but servant leadership, as you'll see on the PowerPoint, it's built on conceptualization, leadership, healing, foresight, listening. This is what you do on a daily basis. Now it's just trying to recognize this, if you haven't already, recognize it in the workplaces or potential workplaces and in the leaders and again the organization. Okay, so another case study is Chili Success, and I know this occurred at Chili's, the restaurant, but I was thinking it's hot. I need some cold weather down here, so I thought chili. With this case study, basically the rehab professional is saying, this is what I do. For instance, I've stopped in at Chili's restaurant to talk to the employer about hiring a consumer to roll silverware. To my surprise, he said yes. Therefore, I assisted the consumer with online application and set a date for interview with the employer. The process from then on would be first aid training, which I provided, and ongoing support and making sure that the ongoing training is set up. Then I ensure that the consumer is comfortable with the environment, and I don't bring up their disability unless they are asked, and I get authorization from the very much a servant leader. This reminds me of whenever I used to recruit and take time talking to potential students, even at restaurants. If I was out having dinner, I would talk to students or encourage them if I found that our waitress or waiter was thinking about going back to school or was enrolled in our university, I'd sit there and I'd take my time to try and be a servant leader. What are your interests? How can I help you? If you need anything, if you're interested in even if you're not interested in majoring in our rehab services, I'm on campus, how can I help you? So again, being that servant leader. And I had to put this in there. My, you dogs excel at servant leadership, and you'll see a picture of the puppy. I wish my dog were more like that, although she's trying to learn to become my my little assistant herself. But okay. Questions, comments before we wrap up? And I'm just going to go through this very quickly.
I think we have 5 minutes left. So.
Okay. So let's look at what motivates employees. We've talked about this a little bit. Social benefits, rewards, training. So these, although they're benefits, can also kind of lead to ethical dilemmas. Let's look at them from the perspective of company factors, worksite factors, worker factors, and benefit factors. And as Noreen mentioned, that perception of people with disabilities by coworkers when they need certain accommodations, it's kind of like, well, why do they get to do this and we don't, right? So company factors deal with organizational culture. We look at how many employees are hired, how many employees are in the work in the company, the organization. Is there cohesion? Are there formal supports? Any sponsored, company-sponsored activities that can help with that social capital, build that social capital? The evaluations. If everybody else is evaluated on punctuality, but yet the consumer with the disability isn't, well, does that make that evaluation fair and equal? We want them treated, we want to take things into consideration, but make it as fair and equal as possible. And then worksite area access. Is it truly integrated? Are they really promoting workplace inclusion, or are they sheltered? Worksite factors are similar. We talk about proximity and similarity. Because you work next to other people, let's just say you have cubicles, that doesn't mean that you share similarities. When you cannot discuss your life events or your work experiences as others do on a daily basis, you may be close to someone, you may be sitting next to them, but that does not mean that there's inclusion at that workplace. And we tend to, or people, maybe employers tend to look at interaction as inclusion, but we need to focus and have them focus on that social action during work hours, after work hours, that promotes that social acceptance of our consumers. Okay. Other factors, and we're wrapping up here. So I'm going to just mention these work factors, benefit factors. They're listed here, but I really did want to touch base on this before we wrap up. This ethical dilemma deals with what level to assist in testing to meet corporate compliance when the company does not offer adapted tests that the consumer could reasonably comprehend. I've had companies tell me that it's okay for me just to take the test for the individual since they're not ever going to do that aspect of the job, but the company just requires that everyone pass a test on it. I've had this issue with food handler's license, entry competency exams, and policies on running the cash register. I don't want the individual to lose a job because the tests are beyond their capacity to understand when they're capable of doing the job, but I also understand that it is dishonest for me to take the test and to make it appear that the individual understands the materials. Also management changes, so in the future new management may expect them to perform based on the testing they did not complete. So very quickly, any questions, comments, concerns on this?
I think people are still thinking, so you might want to go ahead and move on. But we did have one question from Simone who says, "Is there a line between the servant leader and getting connected in the consumer's life?"
Consumer's life?
Yeah, or in the consumer's lives, yeah.
To become too enmeshed, so to speak, correct?
That's how I would interpret it. Yes.
Okay. Um, I would say the line is our code of ethics, okay, where we have to set our personal boundaries. As rehab professionals, as rehab counselors, right away we need to recognize we want to be as much a servant leader as we can, but we also have to abide by our code of ethics and set those boundaries. Does that help answer your question?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So yes, definitely there is a line. In our jobs, yes, absolutely. I think, even we talked about this being what a pastor does. I think even in that respect, there has to be a line. They can only help so much before we don't let them help themselves.
Right. Judith, we've actually come to the 10 o'clock time, which is the close of this session. What I'm going to offer to people, because we wanted to give you a chance to answer the ethical dilemma that you presented, is that if people want to stay on, they can. But for those of you that and we'll just take maybe 3 or 4 or 5 more minutes to kind of go through that information. But for those of you that have, need to move on, you need to know that you need to, you will receive the email from UNT Wise that has the survey, and when that survey is returned is when we process and the CEU, and that's been recorded into your database with us. So, so if I expect that several people will probably need to drop off, but Judith, if you want to go ahead and take a few more minutes and just wrap it up, that would be great.
Thank you, Noreen. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so with this particular dilemma, and I really like this. Unfortunately, this happens, but I really like that this was sent in. I thought about, well, in a sense, the issue is addressed within this case study. When the professional says, I understand that is dishonest, we need to take a step back and look at, remember not only our code of ethics, but our principles, and then our own values and morals. And again, it's meeting with what we just said, that fine line. We don't want our consumer to lose that job or that opportunity, but at the same time, we need to draw the line, set our boundary, because we need to ask, are we allowing them to really become independent, and are we, helping them in that respect? Are we helping too much that now we're violating our own morals, our own values? What does that show as a servant leader, as a transformational leader? What does that show my consumer? Is that really an organization at which I want to place my consumer? If we have workplace inclusion, then, okay, what type of group are they included in, and what are they learning? Does that...
and I think that's the other comment that I received is, if a person discloses their disability, not taking the test or scoring lower on the test can be considered an accommodation.
Good point. Good point. That's a good, I like that, yes. So that really also helps to, if someone is dealing with this, for example, even today, keeping that in mind.
Good.
Questions?
Okay.
Okay. And one last ethical issue that was mentioned last time is I work with students who have just graduated from high school. They normally have no loyalty, and I find it very hard to make them understand about stability and loyalty to a company. Do you have any suggestions about working with young graduates? And these are some of the things that I thought of when I read this. Well, what is a consumer's self-concept? Their personality traits. How do we work with that? What do we recognize? And what is their purpose? as a servant leader, a transformational leader, even, applying the LMX model, that's what we want to find out. What is your purpose? And then, of course, looking at it from the organization, from the perspective of the whole organization, what is that workplace culture? Is it one that promotes trust? Okay, and reason being because then we need to think about, is there honest communication? How honest is that communication between me as a rehab professional and that young worker, so I can help find out more about their purpose. Becoming more connected with what that employee is thinking, to promote or create a collaborative culture, and to have them or teach them to recognize that in the organization. And also think about their career path development. Talk to them about that to help them understand, there's a past, present, and future. So this is not just a job. This is a stepping stone that can help you accomplish your dreams, your goals. But we need to talk about what those are first. We need to have them recognize what those are first. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yes, that sounds great. And I do have a closing comment from one of our employment specialists, and she says, our task as employment specialists is to help our employers be aware of the positive attributes of our clients and to help the employer with any psychological discomfort they may have towards hiring people with disabilities.
Absolutely. It's a big task.
What a great comment and a great way to wrap things up for the day. I really do appreciate the wonderful information you've given us, Judith. Thank you so much. And you did have just about everybody hang on. So
thank you,
everyone. Yeah. And y'all have a great day.
Yes. Have a great day, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye, Noreen.
Bye-bye, Judith. Have a good day.